Hello, 8th graders. In lesson 7, we are going to be looking at more patterns in scatter plots. Here we go. The biggest thing to notice in this scatter plot is that if we try to make a straight line as a model, it doesn't match up very well. Instead, something like a curved line, if we could create a graph with a curved line, it would match it better. So this is actually called a non-linear scatter plot because the trend line would not be a straight line. Notice on this activity that we are skipping to activity 3. Activity 2 will be a card sort that you do in class. The biggest thing to note here is that the data is clustered into groups in some of these graphs. So especially graph D, you can see that the data is clustered into 2 groups there. Graph B, you have 2 clusters that kind of look like that. And graph C, you have 2 clusters that go in this direction. When you see clusters happen in data, it might be telling you something in particular about what's going on between your 2 variables. Here's a couple notes that we want you to write down. First, in lesson 7, one of the big things was looking at the difference between a linear association and a nonlinear association. This would be an example of a scatter plot with a linear association. My trend line would be a straight line. Nonlinear, my trend line would not be a straight line. So if I was going to draw them, here would be my linear, here would be my nonlinear. And then again, clusters in the data would just be wherever you see big groups of data points together. So make sure you write down those notes. In lesson 8, we're going to be doing some more analyzing of our scatterplot data. Here we go. In your first problem here, read the description that goes along with it, and then the big idea is to look at that equation and really talk about what the numbers mean. So answer the question, start again when you're ready. The first thing to remember in this problem is that when they talk about rate of change is the same thing as your slope, and in this equation your rate of change is 4. Remember your y equals mx plus b form. So now if we're talking about what that means, I sketched out this graph because it tells me that L is the step length. That's just like x in my equation. And so along my x-axis is going to be step length, and along my y-axis is going to be speed. And I'm going to remember that slope can be written as 4 over 1 in this case, and that's rise over run. So I'm going to make a slope triangle. I know I don't have any points on here, but I'm just going to make the triangle anyways. And it's just going to look like that. My rise would be 4, my run would be 1. And so what I'm looking at is that every time my step length increases by 1, my speed is going to increase by 4 meters per second. In this activity, we're trying to figure out, is there an association between the weight of an animal's body and the weight of the animal's brain? They give you a bunch of data and a grid to make a scatter plot. Go ahead and plot that data and answer this first question, and then questions 1 through 3 as well. First thing you should notice, are there any outliers? Yep, that point right there, and that correlates to the human data. So we are the outlier when it comes to our weight of our bodies and the weight of our brains. The association between body weight and brain could be described like this. As the body weight increases, the brain weight increases, and we can see that with that positive slope. I created a slope triangle here to estimate slope, and I did include labels, if you'll notice right there, grams and kilograms and grams. So rise over run, I would end up with 100 grams over 100 kilograms, which would simplify to 1 gram over 1 kilogram. So my slope would be 1. Well, what does that mean? Write this down. It means that if your body weight increases by 1 kilogram, the brain weight we are predicting would increase by 1 gram. Now, does this line help us identify any more outliers? Possibly. This one right there could be considered an outlier. Its coordinates are at about 50, 430 about. Now, according to our slope, we would predict that if the body weight was 50 kilograms, that the brain weight would be 50 grams, but this is showing something very different. This is showing that if your body weight was 50 kilograms, the brain weight would be 430 grams, which is very different from our slope. In activity 3, we are going to revisit our class data that we calculated and collected with arm span and height. So find that and continue when you're ready. You have these 4 questions in your book for using this data, but we are going to graph this on Desmos, and I'll walk you through how to create a scatter plot on Desmos. Okay, the first thing we're going to do on Desmos is add some graphs, or add some labels to our graph. So we're going to use the wrench tool right there. So if you click on that, then on our x-axis we can add a label. That's going to be our height. And our y-axis is going to be our arm span. All right, so you've added those. Then we're going to use the plus button in the upper left to create a table. And here's where you're going to enter your data. Now remember that the x is going to be your height, and the y is going to be your arm span. So get that data entered and then come back and watch the video for more instructions. Okay, now you have your data entered. Let's pinch and zoom out until you find all of your data points, and there they are. And the next question is asking you, is y equals x a good line of best fit? So type in y equals x, and as you can see, it's an okay line of best fit, right? It's not perfect. We would maybe have this line go down a little bit and maybe be a little bit steeper. But in general, the slope on y equals x, that's the same as y equals 1x. So our slope would be 1. So this means that if your height increases by 1 centimeter, then your arm span also increases by 1 centimeter. Or in general, your height and your arm span are going to be close to the same. To wrap up lesson 8, there's some things here that you need to be able to answer. If you can't, you got to ask these questions before the quiz on this stuff. What does a point in a scatter plot tell you? Well, it's going to be telling you 2 pieces of information, right? Whatever your x-axis is telling you and your y-axis is telling you. What is an association between variables? We've talked about positive association, negative association. We've talked a little bit about strong and weak association, and also linear and nonlinear association. What does a fitted line tell you about the data? You can use that fitted line to make predictions, and you can use that slope of the fitted line to tell you about how things will change, right? Like as your height increases by 1 centimeter, your arm span will also increase by 1 centimeter.